Those in the public gallery, all electronic devices, with the exception of committee tablets, must be switched off completely while the committee is in session, as they interfere with the transmission and recording of proceedings. Members are asked to ensure that their tablets are switched to the mute mode to ensure quality of sound recording. If members are content, we're going to go through the agenda. First of all, apologies, and Jane, first of all, if you take us through any apologies.
Sure, the chairperson and deputy chairperson may get the meeting at some stage, but they will be late. We've received apologies from Ian McRae. Yeah. I don't think we've received any other apologies as yet.
Okay, members aware of any further apologies? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the draft minutes at pages 5 to 9 of your packs. Members content that the draft minutes are an accurate record of proceedings? Agreed. Okay, they'll be published then on the website. Matters arising, I refer members to the summary request for information from DFP, which provides an update on any matters which are not covered elsewhere in the agenda, pages 11 to 13 of the packs there, just for noting. Right, we then have an issue in relation to LCM, and maybe ask Shane to take us through that.
Chair, I'll just take a moment or two to advise members on some procedural issues around this. Yesterday afternoon, there's correspondence was received from the department, and that's at table papers, pages 3 to 13. Page 3 to 13 of table papers. It's in relation to a proposed legislative consent motion, or LCM, titled Powers to Prevent Transfers Out of Unfunded Public Service Defined Benefit Pension Schemes to Defined Contribution Pension Schemes. And the LCM would extend provisions in the Westminster Pension Schemes Bill to Northern Ireland. These provisions would essentially prevent transfers out of unfunded defined defined benefit public service pension schemes to defined contribution schemes. So the correspondence, as I mentioned, was only received yesterday afternoon. Departmental officials inquired whether today's meeting agenda could be changed to accommodate a briefing. Staff endeavoured to see if this was feasible, but because of the very late notice, Hansard resources were fully deployed, and it wasn't possible to arrange for Hansard cover, which is very necessary on a legislative matter, so to have an official record. So it wasn't possible to schedule a briefing today. Just in terms of the committee has previously stressed the importance of early engagement by the department on possible LCMs, given there's a very tight time frame that applies once the process is initiated. Essentially, understanding Order 42A, the committee has normally up to 15 working days to take evidence and produce a report. But based on the proposed timetable for this LCM, the committee would essentially only have one meeting to take evidence and produce a report. So because in order for the department to keep in line with the Westminster timetable, the department is saying that it thinks it will need a plenary debate week commencing the 10th of November. It's also a cross-cutting issue in terms of affecting other departments in this committee. If it was producing a report, would need to take the views of other committees. So taking all of that on board, Chair, it doesn't seem feasible if according to the current timetable. Now the department has indicated maybe slippage, but at this point in time it's working to the week commencing the 10th of November for a plenary debate. So based on that, it doesn't seem feasible that the committee could produce a report. Now, understanding orders, it's more a discretionary power rather than a duty on the committee to produce a report. It may produce a report to the wider assembly. So,
sort of, I suppose, then on that basis, we're maybe going to make two suggestions. First of all, a letter is sent to the department. I think we need to express concern at the way the circumstances are presented, particularly given the lateness of this, indicating that it will not be possible for the committee to produce a report within the timetable, and suggesting at least that we get an oral briefing on the 5th of November, which at least would be ahead of that. And secondly, I suppose, I think to circulate the DFP correspondence to the other applicable Assembly committees for information. Does anybody else have any comment on this, or are they content with that as a sort of a way forward? Do you think we'll start with the Chair? Go ahead, Judith. Yes, sorry.
I mean, I haven't, obviously, as a table paper, I haven't read this in detail. Are there implications in this for our budget going forward, and could this have implications for the executive trying to agree a budget? Because what I don't want is the executive coming back and saying, well, there's things that the committee needed to look at, and the committee are holding us up. You know, I don't want them passing the buck to us. So, you know, if it was necessary for us to have an additional meeting in order to deal with this matter, you know, I would be.
I suspect in terms of our knowledge of this, we're all pretty much in the same boat.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Shane, is there any...
Chair, I see a reference on the second page at the middle of the second page of the correspondence, a real risk of to public finances if the legislation is not approved by April 2015. HM Treasury and HMRC estimate that the net cost to the Exchequer would reach in the order of 20 million per year across the UK. So there obviously there are budgetary implications, but by the committee deciding not to report on the issue, but just to take evidence and have a Hansard of that, it won't be holding the...
No, we won't be affecting the timetable, and from that point of view, we'll be affecting to some extent what precise role we can play within that.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean, I think the idea is irrespective, whichever route we went down, and if, for example, we had an extra session on it, the thing would be scheduled, from what I understand of things, it requires direct Assembly approval on the floor of the Assembly on the 10th of November. To some extent, I suppose, I mean, I think I'm open if there was any suggestions of an additional meeting. I don't have any problem with that. But I think from the point of view of timing, that won't affect when that would go through. It may just simply reflect the potential quality of the response that we can give.
Okay. Well,
Will members then content with the suggested approach? Okay. Right, we move then on to the next item, which is the valuation study of welfare reform costs, the review of terms of reference. And we've allocated about 15 minutes for this, although I suppose strictly speaking we're already a little bit behind schedule. I refer members just to the following documents. In the main pack, they copy the terms of reference for the study of welfare reform are pages 15 to 18 of the pack of the agenda item 4. And just take sort of members' views on the terms of reference, mindful that the work on the study appears to have already commenced in relation to that. Raymond?
Excuse my ignorance, just because I haven't seen. Had the committee any input in the terms of reference, or was that just from the department?
Chair, no, the committee didn't have any input. When the Minister came to brief the committee on strategic issues, the members did raise the issue of costings around welfare reform and the absence of full information, and arising from that the Minister undertook to commission an independent study, but the committee hasn't had any input to the terms of reference for that study.
I mean, although obviously they're broad enough, but it doesn't seem to be part of terms of reference the actual impact on individuals. It all seems to be very broad in terms of impact.
I think probably that was part of the intention, but I mean, I suppose one option as well is if members wish to raise any particular queries with DFP on how and whether the study will address particular issues. I don't know if you want to raise that, Raymond, as a sort of a query from the department. Thank you. Anybody else have any other queries they wish to raise with the department in connection with this? I think the other thing we'll need just to have in mind, because obviously while it's a DFP-led initiative in terms of the valuation study, obviously if we're looking at welfare issues, that's a key role is also in terms of particularly social development. And as such, I think as a committee, I think we'll need to liaise with the Social Development Committee. And I think it would probably be appropriate then that any correspondence we receive in this issue from DFP be copied to that committee, for at least for information and whatever else they want to do with that. Are members content with that as a report? Yes. Okay, well if that's the case then we'll move on to the next item, which is the report on land value tax, briefing from the Centre for Economic Empowerment and NICFA. Again, we've cut a little bit of time with about 45 minutes. On that, gentlemen, welcome to the following witnesses at the table. Seamus McAlevey, who's the Chief Executive of NICFA, Ronan Lyons, who's an economics consultant, and Andy Whiteman, who's also an economics consultant. I'll refer members to the following documents: the NICFA report, which is at pages 20 to 26 of the pack, and then a separate NICFA report on a land value tax for Northern Ireland at pages, it stretches from pages 27 to 62, and I would invite really the our guests to make a statement. I suppose the more observant of me will notice I'm not Dathry Mackay or indeed Dominic Bradley, but nevertheless, as pro tem chair type of thing, I welcome you to here, Seamus, and thank you. Maybe make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have to say I got caught in the traffic myself this morning, so it's all over. Thanks very much for the invitation to come along here today. And as the committee know, I think this is the 7th report now that we have done in NICFA. And what we're doing is looking at all aspects of the economy, and in our view, trying to shine some light on different aspects of it. As the committee know, we were up here before with the report that we had commissioned from PricewaterhouseCoopers on fiscal powers and how we might look at those with regard to devolution. So this is on land value tax. And the reason that NICFA decided that we wanted to look at this issue was after, I suppose, the property crash, in terms of the bubble that had been created, current, very long recession that we're now in. The property bubble, I think, has been central to that. And the idea for us in terms of looking at the issue of land value tax is one of the things that it holds out is the possibility of smoothing out the issues there with regard to bubbles and speculation with regard to land. So what we wanted to do was have a look at that and see, is there something in land value tax that may be useful for Northern Ireland, and particularly for preventing future problems that we might have. Very pleased that Andy and Ronan have produced the report. I'm going to hand over, I think, first to Andy. He's going to make some comments, then followed by Ronan, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. I thought I would just make a few brief comments about what land value taxation is. Northern Ireland is a system of rates, and land value tax is really very similar to the rating system, except that instead of being an assessment on the whole value of a property, it's an assessment merely on the site value, so the unimproved site value, excluding any improvements. So improvements, buildings, etc., are discounted and disregarded for the purposes of valuation and for the purposes of setting and for the purposes of raising the revenue. And this reflects the fact that, by and large, the principal variant in property prices is the site values, the locational value, and high value land close to amenities in the centre of cities is worth a lot more than land that's on the periphery. So that's basically the what land value tax is. It's operated to varying degrees in a number of countries around the world. It's been highlighted in a number of fora across the UK in recent years, most prominently the Mirrlees Review in 2010, I think, was the Mirrlees Review into the UK tax system, which was a complete review of the UK tax system and how it can be made more efficient and more streamlined, and also how it can be based on more how it can be based on some coherent principles as well. And the Mirrlees Review recommended using LVT as a means of taxing non-domestic property. It didn't for domestic property, but it discussed a slight variant. So that's what LVT is. In my background, I'm an independent consultant on land policy, so I've undertaken work on LVT in Scotland and in England. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. So if Andy was sort of the bigger picture, I'll make a couple of brief comments on the nitty-gritty. And one of the main reasons I think that land value tax is not more widely used is the information required. How do you value a site if there's already a building on it? But to a large extent, the methods and computational power in the last 15 years has changed all that. It is now eminently feasible to do that, and Northern Ireland is an excellent example. The infrastructure already exists in Northern Ireland to do this through the domestic rating system, the rating system in general, and that's the information we used. So we took in this case, we took all the residential ratings, and you can control for the type of property and the size of property, and then allow the numbers to speak for what the value of what's underneath the property is and how that varies by location. So effectively, and we can go into more detail if particular members are interested, but all I wanted to say at this point is just that the data are there and the methods are there, and Northern Ireland has that opportunity.
Okay, I want to ask just a couple of questions. I'll open it up to floor. First of all, I suppose just in terms of, since you've obviously produced the report, Seamus, what's the sort of feedback, if any, you've got from BFP in relation to this?
Well, I mean, we haven't had much feedback since. I suppose people tend to see this as complex, and we've already got a system in place, and it's complicated, and it'll be very difficult to make the change, I suppose, is the main view that you would hear against.
Okay, I suppose then just you mentioned about the complexity potentially of making the change. Obviously, as part of your report, you've given an indication that you're looking sort of valuations to be conducted annually from 2016 onwards. Now, I suppose from our experience, which has tended to be the norm so far on the either domestic or non-domestic side of rates, that you get a sort of a periodic review that appears to take quite a long period of time. There's a considerable amount of anxiety one way or the other from people whenever they're getting that review, and a level of complexity and a concern that everything will be completed in time by the department. I'm just wondering, particularly in terms of whatever level of either administrative costs or indeed the fact of this being almost a degree of rolling process, I mean, how achievable do you think sort of an annual review would be, given sort of the levels of budgetary pressures, particularly that they're at present?
You don't need to supplement the system that Northern Ireland currently has significantly. In fact, the tough work is already done. The idea of having thorough periodic reviews, that is the foundation stone of a good property taxation system. What you need to do annual changes to that is you just need high frequency information. So the kind of information that you get now through, for example, the quasi-official house price index for Northern Ireland, as long as you can break that down roughly by region and by property type, that can be used to update on an ongoing basis, on a quarter by quarter, year by year basis, and then the periodic reviews will work as they currently work. So the tough bit is done.
So the final question I want to ask at this stage, I can see a problem in terms of where people will see a sense of fairness within this, which is if this is based purely on the land and the potential valuation of the land, you could, for example, get two pieces of land of pretty similar size beside each other. One is owned by somebody who is fairly wealthy, may well have built a beautiful mansion, is quite clearly sort of fairly cash rich as well as asset rich in that regard. Beside them is maybe somebody who's inherited the land, who doesn't have a great deal of money. Whatever house they have is much smaller, it's run down. And you get a situation of somebody with, and I appreciate this maybe taking it at two ends of the scale, that you have one person who is comparatively very well off, and somebody else from a financial point of view in a lot weaker financial position. Yet because perhaps the second person, their land may be marginally bigger beside the thing, ends up paying a larger land tax valuation than their very rich neighbour in that regard. I can see, leaving aside any merits in that, I can see there being a certain level of outcry and a concern from people as to that's not particularly fair on that basis. I mean, how would you answer that potential criticism?
Well, this issue already arises in respect of the rates.
Well, but with respect on it, if you have, because this is purely on the land, but which is arguably slightly more arbitrary, if you have, for example, somebody who has taken a reasonable sized house but then expanded it by way of extensions, who has made a considerable level of improvements on it, that is likely to be in a rating system valued higher than perhaps in a neighbour's house if it is much smaller, more run down, etc. So at least there is a certain level of comparison, whereas this seems less, rates are one of the criticisms, a slightly blunt instrument. I suppose there might be a concern that this actually might be an even more blunt instrument in terms of
Well, in terms of a property tax, I mean, property taxes work. I mean, you can regard a property tax as simply a system of raising some revenue. I mean, land value tax, the principles lying behind it are more than just a system of raising some revenue. It's a system of efficient allocation of land and ensuring that land which is valuable isn't held out of production, and there is a significant holding cost to land. So it's designed to achieve more than just a source of revenue. But the question you raise does arise in systems of rates. It arises in the mansion tax that Labour are proposing in England. It arises in the council tax as well. It's a question of how you deal with that. Now, in the rating system, for example, you've put a cap on the rating system. The other way of dealing with this, again, which Northern Ireland pioneered within the UK, was to introduce a deferral system so that you can roll up liabilities. And indeed, that was introduced in Northern Ireland in 2010. I understand it was repealed in 2012.
I think one of the reasons it was repealed, it wasn't very popular here in terms of...
Well,
I don't think it was particularly taken, but also people tended to take a view of... I think there was... A lot of people tend to be nervous about essentially the idea of, yes, not paying bill, but essentially it being stacked up either to the next generation or simply things. So, I mean, I'm not sure that maybe necessarily was particularly successful in that regard.
Well, as I understand, there was 21 people who used the provisions of the rates deferment legislation.
Yes.
It was estimated at the time there'd be around 2,000.
That's correct. Yes.
What that tells you.
Could I make a comment? Is that, and Andy's touched on it in terms of what the tax is meant to do, and there is often a sense that property tax should be in some way based on ability to pay, but that's not what a property tax is about. An income tax is about ability to pay. You can choose politically if there are certain groups that you don't feel would accept the burden of the tax. By all means, under any system, land value tax or any other property tax system, you can say that they don't have to pay. So if it's somebody, say, over the age of 65 with a low income, you can certainly exempt them, but then you are undermining the role of the taxation system, in this case the land value tax, in encouraging scarce high-value land to be used well. And the other thing, I guess, that is really important in this is the planning system. So if you take the example of that person who has a large plot of very valuable land but has a small rundown house on it, and the planning system is saying to them that this is very central and you could house 50 families on that site who otherwise have to live significantly far out of, say, the centre of Belfast. And that's the planning system saying that this land is valuable. It's not the economy, it's the planning system.
Yeah, the only thing just to say is, I mean, do you not think it's going to be a very difficult thing for people to sell if essentially the argument is, this is for other purposes? By the way, we're explicitly saying this is a taxation which isn't in any way related to ability to pay. It's not the purpose of the tax in relation to ability to pay.
Most taxes
I can
are...
see a whatever else, a certain level of public reaction which says you're putting in a tax.
Most taxes are not related to the ability to pay. Only income taxes. Well, so, for example,
with respect on it, some of them are at least have a level of a link or approximation, so that clearly, for example, in a rating system, at the very least, if you've got somebody who's living in a very large house, generally speaking, they will be paying more rates than somebody who's living in a small house. But that is some level of linkage. But
any preferences you have currently can be incorporated into it. It's not against the principle. You're just watering down the principle. So you can still get most of the impact if there's particular groups that you don't want to pay the tax.
Yeah, I appreciate I've hugged this. Perhaps enough in that regard. I'll open up.
Could I just add very briefly that the problem you allude to is to an extent purely one of a transition effects. I mean, taxes like VAT, motoring taxes are also not based on the ability to pay. Television licenses not based on the ability to pay. If you can't afford goods because of 20% VAT, if you can't afford to watch telly because of the TV license, if you can't afford to motor because of road license, you simply don't undertake that transaction. So property tax is a good property tax would also be based on that same principle. I mean, if you cannot afford the property taxes associated with a certain parcel of land, you simply don't acquire it. Having said that, you do have people who are currently in possession of those parcels of land, but that's a transitional issue because people find themselves in a situation.
The transition is basically before people who can't afford things that sell up on that basis. But I'll bring in Adrian when it's the next.
See, I think that the answer to you got there was a wee bit silly, because you can't afford something you don't have it to start off with. But I want to ask about the agriculture land and what we see bringing that into the system, because the land, the agriculture land, and what it provides in jobs to a constituency like mine in East Londonderry is partial to everything that goes on there. So I'd be very opposed to anything that would bring agriculture land into the rating system. But just, can you give me a wee explanation of what you're thinking on behind that is?
Well, in principle, any taxation system on land and property should incorporate all land. And indeed, the rating system did include all land until 1932, when agriculture was taken out of it. So the impact of land value taxation on farmland is slightly different to the impact of the rating system. I think it's a more beneficial tax for agricultural land than the rating system. But the impact of LVT on farmland is really a second-order question. The first-order question is, should agricultural land, for example, and other categories of land be excluded in the first place? And if there's a good argument for excluding agricultural land from the current property tax system, then one could make that same argument for any modification of that property tax system. Having said that, I personally do not believe that it's a good idea for agricultural land to be exempted from property taxes. What happened in 1932 and what happened in Great Britain in the 1950s was that they were derated, and the agricultural owners of agricultural land therefore obtained windfall gains. Because they didn't have to pay tax, but the florist and the hairdresser and the garage owner in the town and village continued to have to pay tax. And that's been reflected through the decades in the price of land. So agricultural land is now way over its productive value, whereas land that's subject to non-domestic rates has been much more the price of land, the value of land has been much more moderated by the fact that paying 30, 40, 50 pence in the rental value of land makes sure that people don't, by and large, hold on to land that they haven't got a good use for, and keeps the capital value down.
Yeah, but agriculture land isn't land that they haven't got a good use for. It's land that is actually being used still for animals and all other sorts of things. So it's needed in the countryside. And what would that land do in the next to the countryside if it wasn't for agriculture? What would it be used for?
I guess the point is that bizarrely or perhaps unexpectedly, when so I prepared a similar report for the Republic, and one of the groups that was strongly in favour of a land tax were farmers, not the farmers' union, but individual farmers, who said that this would get people who hold land off land, and that it would allow farmers who use land well, they would be the ones that benefit. However, having said that, if politically it is a non-starter to include agricultural land in the general property taxation system, that holds true regardless of whatever property tax system you choose. So if politically it's the will of the people of Northern Ireland not to tax agricultural land, there's no reason why land value tax would be any different.
Okay. Sorry.
Could I just briefly add to that? One of the recommendations we made was, though, that we should make these issues more transparent, so that all land should be valued and should be on the valuation roll, so that at least politicians, the public, and others, academics who want to do studies, can actually see the cost of these exemptions. Because at the end of the day, if you exempt any particular class of property, all the other property occupiers have to pick up that burden. So one of our recommendations is to make these kind of exemptions more transparent as to their ongoing costs, both to other ratepayers and to the public at large. And there may still be good arguments for exempting it, but those arguments can be made on the basis of real data, as opposed to just what happened in 1932. And I'm not quite clear whether the rationale for derating in 1932 would still hold or not. And look closely at the arguments.
Leslie?
I don't remember 1932 very well either, so
Don't remember that.
we'll just leave that.
Leslie, better chance than the rest of us.
You only went to primary school.
I'm particularly interested in, how you establish the basic land values. How do you actually benchmark that against something that doesn't exist?
So effectively what the lowest value of land use would be a basic agricultural land use compared to commercial or residential. So that sets your threshold for what when you're going from, say, if we say agricultural is not being included, as soon as a planning authority decides we're switching this from agricultural to residential, it can't be going down in value, it has to be going up. And it's going up by, so you figure out if you were to sell, say, a detached bungalow on that site, how much would it sell for? And how much would it sell for?
So I'm talking about basic, how you start this off, a basic land price. What do you benchmark against? Basic land value. What do you benchmark it against?
So, okay, maybe I didn't understand the question, but what I'm answering is how you calculate land value. Is that the question you're asking?
It may be, but that's perhaps the second step. To bring in this tax, we'd obviously have to start, without any other price that we can actually compare.
So the comparison is, how you calculate it is, you use the information.
How do you start the initial values?
So, okay, so hopefully I can answer this time, and apologies if I'm not understanding. If you have a house on an acre site, and the built structure...
Sorry, in my book, you don't have a house at all, right?
Yeah.
You've got a field of land.
Okay, well then, in that case, what would that field of land sell for? But the vast majority of rateable land is already developed, so you don't have that benchmark. So you can't just go, what would the land sell for on its own? So you need to work out what's the value above and beyond the built structure on it, and that gives you an indication of what the value of the land is.
You're walking into my trap. So the actual value of any vacant land depends largely on its location, doesn't it?
Yes?
It depends on the local area plan, doesn't it?
Yep.
Local area plans are given to change,
Yes.
right? So it doesn't then become really a land value tax at all. It becomes part of another system, pretty well similar to the rental system we have at the moment, where there are notional values in different areas, and some are realistic and others may not be. You've set a situation where you have set-aside land, for example. What happens there? Under the European rules, we have actually land is not being used at all. Call it set-aside.
Is that,
you value that,
is that agricultural, zoned agricultural?
Yes.
Well, as before, if we're excluding agricultural, that issue doesn't arise.
Yeah, but I want to include agriculture, you see.
Well, then that land would be taxed as to, if it were used efficiently, what would it generate? So how much, if it were tillage land, how much grain would be produced? Or if it were pasture, what would be the output on an ongoing basis?
Okay, and if it were hill farm land?
Well, exactly, the value would be lower.
Again?
Yeah.
All land, by and large, has a value at the moment, and it's entered in the valuation roll. Whether it's domestic on a capital basis or non-domestic on a rental basis, there are some parcels of land which is very difficult to value because ambulance stations and things, and they're valued according to what's called a contractor's method. I don't need to go into that, but it's a formula for giving value to properties that don't really change hands. So I mean, we don't really know how much fire stations and things are worth. So all land has currently a value. Land value tax, all it does involve is to disaggregate the site value from the improvements. And that's not terribly complicated. We have a table in the report showing a map of land in Denmark, table figure 8, page 17. And so there are jurisdictions around the world which regularly value, in this case, land per square metre, and then they also value the property value. So this is not, technically this is not complicated.
No, but it starts off on a non-scientific basis.
It doesn't start off on a non-scientific basis, no. I mean, as long as to an extent, it actually doesn't matter if you get the disaggregation. Let's say you assume that the disaggregation is 50-50. It'll vary from site to site, but you can calculate that. But it doesn't really matter as long as relative values are correct. So in other words, land that is worth less is worth sufficiently less on the roll than land which is valuable. The relative values
But it's
matter.
so, I don't want to labour the point, but it's those values which make it more, those sort of issues that make it more valuable. For example, the planning.
Indeed.
Changes the whole scene completely.
Yes, yes.
And it looks to me like there's not a big difference or a big added value here, other than being anti-developer. To stop people holding land banks. Is that an unfair criticism?
Well, that's
This is a pro development in the sense that you're getting, it's an anti-speculator. It's against those, as is happening, say, in Dublin at the moment, people who are buying sites up in the anticipation that they will increase or triple in value in the next 3 or 4 years, and they have no holding cost in doing that. So
The sort of thing we'd all like to be doing, isn't it?
exactly, but if you think about it, it's the only asset that you could do that for, because the government, the society creates the value of land, but yet gets no rent for it. And that's the underlying justification for land value tax, is that the reason some land is very valuable is because of what society has provided close to that land. So be it access to jobs, access to schools, or even access to natural amenities, they're all valuable and they improve the value of land, but they cost money, which is where the taxation system comes
But
in.
you've got supply and demand in there as well, which is a very important issue. So, for example, if I were an oil exporter, I can control the price of it quite well just by producing less of it when it suits.
Which you can't do with land.
Exactly. You can't do that with land.
You can if you don't move it.
But it's fixed in supply.
Well, it's finite, there's no doubt about that.
Yes. The other issue here, of course, is that Ronan mentioned speculation. I mean, Northern Ireland has experienced the most severe property crash in the whole of the British Isles.
The whole of the developed world, I would argue.
Okay, certainly more than the British Isles. And so we've got some figures in.
We're a world leader in something.
We've got some figures in 1.2 about the impact that's had on the citizens of Northern Ireland. So, for example, had house price inflation from 2002 to 2011 been kept at 2%, a total of £5.6 billion of personal debt would have been avoided. 41% of borrowers in Northern Ireland who've taken out mortgages since 2005 owed more than their house was worth during the last quarter of 2013. The social costs of allowing asset inflation, property bubbles and busts are huge. And part of, and indeed one of the tools available to try and at the very least moderate, if not avoid that, is by having a realistic system of property taxation that incurs a higher holding cost when land prices rise, and that discourages the idea that you can hold on to it for 3 or 4 years and make a large gain. So this is an important economic tool. It's not the only economic tool. I mean, but importantly, it's one of the economic tools available to the Northern Ireland Assembly.
The 3 other questioners, I see the chair's obviously right, but with indulgence we'll complete this item and then hand back to the chair to its rightful owner.
Then your reign will be over.
Reign of terror will be over. John, I don't know if you're going to get on board agriculture at this point. But
Well, I'm going to declare an interest in that. I'm a small landowner. Actually, I don't have it's an interesting subject. I wouldn't, accept the point that I wouldn't particularly object to paying it across if it's included. If you're setting in the context of redoing your entire rating system, so you're doing away, you'll be changing what I pay in domestic rates and putting it on to both what my house is worth and property's worth and land. I mean, there's some of it is interesting. And how responsive is the system, or how to what others have questioned, when you suddenly zone something? For example, in outside Newry, I think it cost the taxpayer something like 16 million more because somebody zoned land before road service had purchased it, and suddenly the land value shot from agricultural to commercial, and the taxpayer had to pick up 16 million more of a bill. In this system, how do you handle things like that? Leslie had brought in around even just area plans. How responsive can the system be, and how responsive then does either the Department of Finance or indeed if local councils are getting part of this as their tax? How responsive can you be to changes in that in that you may be living in a place and happy to pay 40 or 50p an acre or whatever it happened to be of a land tax. But suddenly if it gets zoned, and you know, this isn't a problem just in land tax, it comes in even to things like farms with inheritance tax. It suddenly can change the value and whether it's in or out of the scope of inheritance tax.
Exactly.
When you get development potential on land. So there are other issues around that, but how responsible is the system?
Well, the system is as responsive as it can be. You've already mentioned inheritance tax, for example. So, I mean, agriculture is also out with the scope of agricultural property relief, available. And the point is, if you leave anything out with the tax system, then that means that you're forgoing potential revenue and someone else is picking up the bill. But it also means that you distort the market, because the incentives to sell a piece of land may no longer exist because you believe you can hold on to that and make a gain at some later date. So the responsiveness in a system of any property tax, never mind LVT, where it attempts to impose an appropriate holding charge on land to reflect its inherent value according to the community, the responsiveness is in the fact that you have the choice as the owner or the occupier as to what you do with it. I mean, you can take that charge and pay it, or you can sell it. In other words, it does begin to a well-designed property tax system begins to influence people's behaviour.
So if I'm living on the edge of a town and own land on that, but I don't actually want to sell it for housing,
you are faced with a choice of paying the cost to society for withholding that from the use to which society believes it should be put, or selling it to someone who wants to pursue the use to which society, through democratically elected local government.
Can I just clarify that this is land that you're living on the edge of town and the local authority has decided that this is now zoned residential?
Yeah.
Well, in that case, then, as Andy says, it's society that has decided that this land is best used for significantly higher density than one rural bungalow. So it's not in making that decision. And I'll speak where I've more experience. Local politicians in the Republic could costlessly decide that this is now residential, but you can keep it and you won't pay any cost to that. Under a land value tax system, making the decision to zone something residential is not taken lightly. It's done based on need, not based on, well, here's some free money. And if and when you sell, you get your windfall, but you don't worry about it until then. So it does put significantly more responsibility in the hands of local politicians, that when they decide to zone residential, they will do so knowing that they are putting people on that land under pressure. So it turns something that was free and shouldn't have been free into something that people have to weigh up before they zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because I suppose in pure commercial terms, you could move it from 10, 15,000 pounds an acre to,
100,000.
100, maybe at the height of the property, maybe even close to £1 million an acre. And so that, I'm interested. I mean, you'd mentioned, Andy, about is there much evidence to suggest that our current system has that big an effect on our actual land, on particularly agricultural land values? Is it not more just supply and demand and on a marketplace because it's completely exempt from outside the rating system, or do you think it would be more controlled if it was in a land value tax?
Well, as the Mirror Lease Review and other studies have made clear, it's in society's interest to have land allocated efficiently and appropriately according to society's needs. And one of the means by which to do that is through the taxation system. And if you have a class of land like agriculture that's completely out with it, then those signals are not being sent, and it means that land will be kept in agricultural use, which would be far better used, more efficiently used for another use. So this is not a new issue either. I mean, this, when planning legislation was introduced comprehensively after the Second World War, there was a committee called the Ofwat Committee on Betterment, and their view was that by rationing permissions, in other words, by saying you can develop this land here for residential, but you need our consent and you can't do it here, there would be windfall gains to landowners. And the idea then was to capture that as a betterment tax, because it was deemed to be unfair that landowner A was being refused consent and landowner B was being granted consent, and landowner B suddenly becomes very rich overnight and landowner A stays the same. There was also a system of compensation, so that landowners who had at that time granted consent out with the planning system to build houses or whatever could be compensated for the diminution in value of their land because it now had to have planning consent. So there's a long history, development land tax in the 70s, the Barker Review on housing that Gordon Brown, Prime Minister, established. There's a long history of trying to capture for the public, for the community, the value in land that's created by decisions of public authorities such as zoning, or indeed the classic case are to do with transport infrastructure, where you build new railway lines and new motorways and the price of land rises. So there's a long history of this. It's not a new thing. Land value tax is a much more efficient system of capturing that value. But if society decides it doesn't want to capture that value, or only wants to capture it partially, or wants to exempt various groups for political reasons, it's completely free to still do that under a new system. But this is a more efficient system for doing it, if that's what you want to do.
Okay. I think Paul's someone I suspect been chumming at the bit for some time, judging his body language.
Just on that, I get somewhat. We're looking to try and bring forward a system which is fair as possible. The system we currently have has been designed in such a way where some attempt to identify areas that pay higher rates as a consequence of amenities and everything else, and as a consequence of that it has worked its way down. But to come back on what John had just went in on, you know, if you go back to my view, planning have a key role to play. They played a big role in inflating prices in Northern Ireland because of lack of land zoning. You know, we had people who were garden grabbing because there was no development land available because of lack of zoning. So, you know, if you go down my route, no zoning, let it go ahead. Let it, whoever owns it, providing it meets planning design criteria, that's fine. But if you want to build on it, go ahead. Now that's a fair and free way of working at it, which means that if you want to build on the top of Shane's Hill and you've got plenty of land up there, and the plan department say, well, what you're putting up is not going to be an eyesore, it's going to fit in, that's okay, let you go ahead, forget about it. But this is all dependent upon how we work with zoning, and it can't just stand on its own where we just introduce a land tax system without completely revamping our zoning policies as used by the Department of Environment in our planning. And just in relation to this piece of work, I'd just like to know where this came from, and you know, what was your ultimate aim and objective? Was it to create a level playing field for all, or was it to ensure that those that had plenty paid plenty, or those that had none paid none? You know, I'm just not sure. Just like to get your rationale as to where this came from and who put it forward to you.
Well, very briefly on the first question, certainly land value taxes, to implement it in its pure form, is dependent on a very effective planning system, so that land is valued according to its highest and best use. Now, if you don't have a very effective planning system, or it's patchy, or whatever, then obviously land value taxation can't deliver all it's capable of delivering. But that doesn't mean to say that it still can't deliver something, because all land still has a market value. Some of that market value will be hope value, in the expectation that a decision might be taken in the future, but it still has a market value. So you can still assess land for its market value, even though you do not know its highest and best use. Its highest and best use, in effect, is determined by the market. So you can still implement this within an imperfect planning system. But I absolutely agree that to maximise its potential, you need a very effective planning system. As for where this work came from, that's perhaps best Seamus asked that, because we were commissioned to do this work, as I understand it. The point was to explore, in the light of, amongst other things, the severe boom and crash in property prices in Northern Ireland whether a system of LVT could assist in avoiding that in future.
I mean, that was our reason for Commissioner Paul, in that we wanted to look at, was there a better way, that might influence things. John mentioned that land on the outskirts in Uri that the department bought for the road and had gone up. Also, I think it was in a 6-year period, house prices in the Uri area went up by 300%. There was a big rise, obviously, in the cost of housing, and as Andy's pointed out in the figures here, there's a huge debt legacy caused by it, which is a huge drag on us. So that was our interest.
Did you not believe that, I'm dealing with many developers, and this role here, we probably meet them day and daily in many areas. One of the main reasons for property value or land value rising to a degree was because of the lack of zoning in certain areas. You notice that the areas that prices rose to the greatest extent were areas where there was insufficient land available for development, and as a consequence, every patch, and you had rows of houses that were purchased simply because they sat on fairly good sites, half-acre sites, and you ended up with apartments being built onto those areas to increase the value of what they paid, because they paid £1 million would have been cheap on some occasions, and as a consequence they had to stack them high and sell them. That was their way of dealing with it. Unfortunately, it maybe didn't give you anything. But do you not believe that the zoning had more of an impact upon how our price rises rose to a greater degree? Land prices have stayed stable in Canada simply because they have plenty of land, and they have massive tranches of land that you can develop, and there's never been any issue. Where you start to try to restrict that, you drive prices up. Is that not more to a bearing to what actually happened in Northern Ireland than everything else? And as a consequence, those land prices had a marked impact upon the prices of properties that were being sold. And an unrealistic realisation was, people were saying, I'm sitting in a house that's worth 600,000, and today some of those people still think their house is worth 600,000. It's only worth 2,
So I've as you can imagine, being a housing economist based in Dublin for the last while, this has been a live issue down south as well. In terms of stopping housing bubbles, the two things you want to address are credit and supply. On the supply side, planning is clearly a restriction, and there's some great research done in the US that the only reason the price of a family home differs across major cities it's nothing to do with anything complicated. It's to do with how tightly controlled the supply of zoned land is. And in that sense, the land value tax, it affects both expectations, which is the credit side, but it also affects the signals that if you put yourself in the shoes of someone living in a supply-constrained area, that planning hasn't expanded to allow the city or the town to grow, that drives up the value of the land. So that's a signal from the voter to send to the local politician: we need more zoned land because we need more homes because this town is growing.
We attempted to do that through the Belfast Metropolitan Area Plan. Unfortunately, it took us 15 years to get it.
But we know there was quite significant land banking went on as well. There was quite a bit of speculation when people held land to develop it. I mean, I think your colleague Sammy Wilson, when he was the finance minister, although I might misattribute this, said about some of that land that ended up in NAMA, that large amounts of development land for sale with great agricultural potential, in terms of what that was now worth, in terms of there was a lot of land that was held and people were expecting to make a bigger killing on that,
And had the property market continued to grow the way it was, probably those would have been developed out at some stage. But
Okay, Raymond.
Thank you very much. Just a number of questions. I think in your last comment, Ronan, you're on about credit and supply. But which had the biggest impact, the lack of supply or the availability of credit in terms of property pricing?
So it would take I suppose a second piece of analysis to do a horse race between those two factors, but I can certainly give you the view from Dublin, where I have done that analysis for the Republic. In the Republic, there were two phases of the bubble. The first was a lack of supply, and the second was an excessive credit. And that's quite common internationally, that you don't get excessive credit overnight for no reason. And what happens is you have a build-up of a couple of years, maybe 5 or 6 years of a lack of supply that generates the expectation that housing and land is going to go up in value by, say, 10% plus year on year. And then the credit comes in that both borrowers and lenders think, well, this is definitely going to happen. So the most damage was done by credit. But the initial problem is created by supply.
Yeah, because that brings me to the scenario of the edge of town piece of land. And when Andy was speaking, you talked about society's needs. So the society says that they need this piece of land to build houses, but if they're not social housing, then what control have you over the price if it's given to, say, a developer who can, then just go for supply and demand? So in principle, I agree with the idea that if there's somebody deliberately holding land, society needs it. But if society hands it over to the developer, you could end up with, the same scenario.
And this is a very, what's happened, particularly in Dublin in the last 2 years, values have risen by 35 to 40% again. Yeah. So it's a live issue. And if you want affordable accommodation, you need a social housing strategy, because there are families who will never be able to afford to borrow and buy themselves. But if you just look at the private sector, how do you make sure that supplier doesn't make a killing? Yeah. Well, what you need is, and it sounds almost simplistic, given that the housing market seems quite complicated. If you have a lot of supply and credit is not excessive, that drives down the price, and that's the biggest mistake the Republic made in the build-up to the bubble. They got the supply in all the wrong places, and now you're seeing the legacy of that with values rising rapidly in Dublin.
And I think earlier on we talked about, would there be an actual figure on the cost of exemption at present? Would that be
exemption of
people not paying, in terms of land now being held and not being subject to any form of taxation?
Well, I'm not sure there is. I mean, one of the recommendations we make is that derelict land should be brought within the rating system, yeah. Never mind a land value tax system. My understanding is that land that is vacant and derelict is not actually attributed a value. I may be wrong on that. But so in other words, without attributing it a value, we don't know what the cost is of not rating it.
And again, because in economic impacts, they're very impressive figures that, that in terms of if we had a cap property inflation at 5%, then you might not have the bubble. But how would the value, the land value tax had an impact on keeping, if credit's available? And not by any means an expert, but if you look at it from, just as a layperson, it seemed to be that mortgages were too easily got. So therefore, you have a house and, you heard somebody get £50,000 for it, and I'm going to try my arm here for 60, and you ended up getting it. So there was no scientific so it's this idea of how do you control the credit.
So controlling credit is key, but suppose for whatever reason you aren't controlling credit, and perhaps that's beyond the scope of what you guys can do. Land value tax increases the holding cost. So the best example I can give is 100 years ago, when you bought a property, you had a ground rent, and the ground rent was meaningful in that it was a significant chunk of your monthly expenses, and that kept property prices in check because you had to pay this every month or quarter or year. But of course, over time, that got inflated away. And the classic example in the Republic is 1977-78, when they abolished rates. That year, property prices jumped 20%. With the year they abolished rates, because you no longer had this annual expense. By introducing the annual expense, you get people a lot more sensible when they're making their, is it 50 or is it 60,000? They go, well, I will have to pay this amount every year. And there is clearly a transitional effect, which Andy mentioned, that one-off change from System A to System B will create winners and losers. Within System B, within a land value tax system, say, people will make significantly more sensible decisions when they are faced with that cost year on year.
Thank you.
Paul, I want to briefly back in just on that point.
Just on the point of property price rises, and there is a table there, and it's figure 2, and it shows you the price rise and fall of property prices over quite a number of years. And if you look yes, mid-80s, the prices of property fell, and as a consequence of that, it's probably, remember, there was 16.5–17% interest in those pages, and if you look where they dropped the interest rate, and as soon as they dropped the interest rate, the price started to rise again, and then again you have another drop that came in early 2000, where you've seen the price interest rate dropped again, back down again to a fairly reasonable level, and then 2004, 2005, where you would have got a mortgage at 0.5%. 0.5%. They were offering 0.5% above base rate mortgage. That was the sort of thing people were getting. And as a consequence of that, you had, by the demand of the credit, I think that had more to fuel it than anything else. And by cheap money being available, some people actually didn't particularly care what they paid. All they were worried about was what it was going to cost them every month. The top figure wasn't necessarily the big issue. And I think that interest rates as well had an impact. So it's not just, it's a catalogue of things.
Yeah, if I would just reiterate what I said earlier, is that credit is what does the real damage, but it is built on the foundations of, say, a lack of supply. So I'd agree completely.
Well, interest rates halved, I think, when the Republic joined the euro.
Yeah.
And you couldn't make that. I mean, you'd had to have been raising taxes, income tax or something, to offset that injection of cheaper credit.
That in and of itself created upward pressure on prices. What unfortunately amplified it was declining standards in lending. So instead of looking for a 20% deposit, looking for a 2% deposit or a 0% deposit.
That was very politely put.
Money in your hands.
Two for the price of one.
Well, folks, on that note of politeness, I'd like to thank the witnesses. It was very useful.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
We'd ask you just, I suppose, as a committee, obviously got a lot of information. They've obviously got your reports. There may be, at some stage, they seek follow-up information, so we just ask you to provide that if it's requested. And just seek, I suppose, the final act then from members' agreement just to forward the papers to DFP for response to the recommendations on the order. Members agree? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. And at this stage, then, like a pretender to the throne, I will now sort of leave the realm and make way for the rightful monarch to take his place at the head of the table.
Charlie.
Okay, members, moving on to the next briefing from the Department of Finance and Personnel. I can refer to your papers, pages 64 to 77, and the preparation sheet in terms of questions on the table of papers. Okay, can I welcome to the committee Tony Simpson from the Strategic Policy Division in the Central Finance Group, Noel McNally and William Dixon, also from the Strategic Policy Division. You're all very welcome to the committee. Is it okay if I proceed straight to questions, anybody?
Yes.
Can I make any opening comments? Okay, I'm going to bring Leslie in first.
Oh, very welcome, gentlemen. Could I just perhaps discuss the air passenger duty situation?
Yeah.
As you know, we have the long haul thing resolved. Just wondering how effective do you reckon that has been? How have we maximised the benefit from that? What changes, what slippage in fact exists in that whole area? And maybe take it on into the next sort of logical area where APD would be sort of handled for all flights. The first flight, 600 million, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, well, I'll take some questions in turn. In terms of the long haul, the main objective of devolving the long haul band was to secure our only direct air service to New York. and we've done that. It is slightly disappointing that it has reduced the service in some of the earlier months of the year. However, we're hopeful that that will help improve the profitability or maintain the profitability of the route. So we see that going forward. I don't want to stray too far into Derry territory, but I know certainly that department and the Enterprise Minister have been taking steps to see what they can do to attract or encourage other flights, and they're working with the local airports. And I know that Derry was at the World Routes Conference and had a stand there. So it's trying to certainly promote Northern Ireland as a destination for other airlines. But I think Derry would be better placed to advise on where that work is. In terms of the short haul, we're looking at that, as you're aware, I'm sure. There's a commitment in the Economic Pact that we're looking at the broad range of additional fiscal powers that potentially we could seek the devolution of, and what we're looking at there is the extent to which those taxes are potentially useful levers in trying to generate some economic or social benefit. So we're looking at APD in that context. That work is nearing conclusion. It's not complete yet. The last time I was up with the committee, we spoke about the research that Derry and ourselves are leading on, looking at how effective APD is going to be, or could potentially be, in influencing airline routes making decisions, and we're hoping to be able to report and advise the Minister on that in the next few weeks.
So this area has a green status. Does it deserve that, or what remains to be done?
Yes, well, generally in terms of that work, we have been working through each of the individual taxes, looking at the tax, how it's structured, looking at the economic kind of basis of the tax in terms of how effective it is in influencing behaviours across the whole piece of the full range of taxes, including APD. In terms of the APD study, last time we were at the committee, we advised you on there was an interim report produced on a literature review. At the moment, we have Derry have received a draft report from the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy, who have been working with some specialist aviation consultants that Derry procured, and they have produced some economic modelling work, which we need to see the final output from, but that work is draft final report stage, so we hope to see the output of that very, very shortly, and we'll be in a position to advise the Minister and in turn the committee.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
In terms of corporation tax, Tony, where are we? I know that there's been many references to it by the Minister, all very positive, but in terms of detail, we haven't really got that much. Could you give us some update as to where things are in terms of Objective B1? Obviously, it's marked down as amber as opposed to green. So, what are the sticking points at the moment?
Well, there's two targets there, Chair, in relation to corporation tax. The first is green, where we're working towards the decision, and we have been working very closely with Derry, OFM, DFM, and we've also been engaging with Treasury and HMRC, and on a very kind of increasingly regular basis as we're getting close to the time. The focus of the work so far has been on developing the different aspects of the regime in terms of how they would apply here in Northern Ireland if a positive decision is reached. So that's been very much the focus to date, and in turn then Treasury and HMRC have then been drafting the legislation which would be required to give effect to devolution if a positive decision was reached. So that's what that first green status refers to in terms of the work taken to the decision. In terms of the amber status, that's the second target there, which is to agree the funding arrangements. Now, some of this is sequential because the funding arrangements depend on the block adjustment, and the block adjustment that will be required depends on the actual design of the regime. in terms of the cost, because obviously, you know, in the simplest possible terms, we have to, you know, our block will be reduced by the impact that this is going to have on exchequer revenues. So that depends on some of the different aspects of the regime and how it's designed. So we've marked that as amber because that's dependent on us getting agreement. Well, one, for settling the technical issues, and then getting agreement on precisely how the block adjustment mechanism is going to be applied. So we're getting close. We had a video conference with Treasury over the last couple of days. They've suggested to us that hopefully we will be able to see the final aspects of the design over the coming weeks, and they're still confident that that will be done before the decision on the third, or before the backstop for the decision on the 3rd of December. And on the back of that, then we've also asked to see the updated costs and proposals in terms of how the block adjustment mechanism would be applied. So, you know, in terms of the timescale working towards that decision, we believe we're on track, but it's flagged as amber because there's, you know, that aspect of the work is coming quite late. And I suppose the other point I would make in terms of the block adjustment mechanism is that even if you look at the Scottish context, where in the powers that were devolved in 2000 or agreed in the 2012 Scotland Act, you know, there's powers that are going to be devolved next year, and even 6 months in advance of that, they haven't fully settled on some aspects of how the block adjustment might work. So it's not, I suppose my point there is that we're not unusual in the timing where we are here in terms of the broader devolution context.
The next few weeks are obviously going to be crucial. In terms of the December cut-off point, if there is a positive decision before Christmas, what work needs to take place immediately thereafter?
Well, we're working to get all the preparatory work done. Essentially, you know, if there's a positive decision, then it will be taking the legislation through Westminster, and the target that the Prime Minister had set, what he had previously said, is they want to make a decision by the autumn statement, with the legislation being laid before the end of this current Parliament. And Treasury have indicated to us that they're still confident that should a positive decision be made, that timetable can still be adhered to. So the next work, essentially, the focus of the work will be on getting the legislation through before the Parliament. If there's a positive decision, well then, obviously, you know, there would need to be ongoing work, short of any decision to apply a new Northern Ireland rate with various administration arrangements in place. But that's a longer term piece. The focus would then be in taking the necessary legislation through.
Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I want to ask you about the aggregated levies credit scheme. You know, and said that you update on the European Commission investigation scope for the new ALSC scheme.
Yep.
Can you give us a wee update on that and where we're at in that there?
Yes, no, I'm pleased that we can report some kind of very positive progress on that, over and above what you have here in the business plan. The Commission announced that it had made its final decision in August. Where it's following the investigation, and you know, we've worked very closely with the industry and with HMT and HMRC colleagues in this to provide evidence to the Commission to allow them to undertake their investigation. That's now completed, and they've indicated to us that they have found that the aggregate levy credit scheme is compatible with the European Environmental Aid guidelines that applied at the time. So the outcome of that is that they will not be seeking the recovery of the aid that operators benefited from here, which was the risk that, and the very significant risk that local operators had hanging over their heads. So that's, you know, that's a very positive outcome for us.
And are you going to make that known to the operators, or when, or do they know about that yet?
Yes, the Commission have issued a press release in August. And we've been liaising with the Quarry Products Association, so the industry are aware of that. We haven't seen the full detail of the Commission decision. They produce a full determination, which is many pages long, and that's currently being looked at. They have to redact that to take out whatever confidential information is in it, and we hope that it will be published in the near future.
Maybe share it with the committee as well?
Yes, absolutely. But in terms of the outcome of no recovery, that's already been pre-announced, so, and it's been welcomed by the industry.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Raymond?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much. Just on the table B3, in terms of the pay policy.
Yes.
in terms of that most of them have a green, I mean, obviously have been achieved. So in terms of item 2, provide a response to 95% of cases within 9 working days, that has now been met?
Yes, we are. I'm just trying to look for it. Yes, we are on target there and have exceeded that. We have precise figures here.
Yes, just to take that, Tony, we have looked to date from 1st of April 14 at 35 pay remits, and we have met that target to get responses within the 9 working days there.
And the first column, it's an amber, the pay guidance currently with the Minister for consideration expected to be published by the end of August. Is that now green?
That was published on the 27th of August.
That's green now. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Peter?
Thank you, gentlemen. Could I ask you just on OP1, which is the implementation of the performance management framework, and just in terms of on the issue of performance deadlines, which are referred to in the target, why are the deadlines they are not specified, and can I get an update on the current performance against this target?
So is that the first implemented performance management framework?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, there are deadlines that are applied just essentially across the department, and they're adhered to. I don't have them to hand, but I know certainly where we are now is that we are in the process of completing in-year reviews, which need to be then completed by...
An updated version, would you be given those? Because again, if we're not getting the full information, at least on the basis of it, it's not always helpful to... It's easier, if you like, to then monitor how we're doing.
Certainly we can. The deadlines are around getting end-year reports for last year done, and we've been through those, and theirs are all completed. The latest deadline at the moment is this month then to have the mid-year reviews done, and we're doing that with staff across the division.
Then if you're saying that you're in the process of updating that, obviously at the moment today you're not in a really position to give us an update on the current performance against target, but presumably you'd hope to have that information reasonably soon. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's monitored regularly by our HR folk, and it's something that we're working towards the end of the month to have all of those completed, and that will be done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just to take you back, Tony, to B1.4, in terms of banking issues in particular, how are they progressing, and are there any improvements that you want to report?
Yes, the banking stuff is going quite well. There's a broad range of issues covered under banking. I suppose some of the progress that I'd like to highlight is that the Joint Ministerial Task Force that was established as part of the Economic Pact has now met 3 times, and as recently as last week. One of the things that we were looking to get was better transparency on data, and the BBA, or the British Bankers Association, have published bank lending data for Northern Ireland for Q1 and Q2 2004 within the last week. They've agreed with us on discussions they're going to provide more disaggregated data in the next quarter, which will give us information on new lending by sector, so we can see which sectors are actually benefiting from the new lending. At the moment, it's at an aggregate. The ministers continue to meet with the local banks. The DFP minister met with Ulster Bank within the last couple of weeks just to discuss how they were taking forward their restructuring plan and how the RCR division of the bank was kind of dealing with that kind of loan portfolio. I suppose the other main point that I would flag is the...
In terms of that there, the RCR, how are they performing in comparison to GRG,
Yes, well, they're ahead of schedule. They had targets which they had agreed with the government to work through their loan book within 3 years. They've indicated that they're on track to meet that, and perhaps slightly ahead of that.
What is the impact of that on business customers and local customers of the bank?
Well, in short, they are in trying to work through that loan book. They're either trying to, they present customers with a number of options. It's whether they can reach agreement on repaying the loan, whether it can be refinanced. We've seen that in some of the, in recent months, that the Ulster Bank have sold on some loan portfolios. selling on to kind of third parties who will then manage those loans. And what we were keen to discuss with the bank was just the process there and how customers are being treated and communicated in terms of what the various options are, and that they're aware of the process and the steps through that. So it very much depends on a case-by-case basis.
What about NAMA then in terms of their portfolio?
Well, the vast bulk of that has now gone to Cerberus, who are managing that, or who have ownership of that loan portfolio. So NAMA have very, very little, relatively speaking, in Northern Ireland now. So it's very much, the focus is more on Cerberus and on the Ulster Bank.
What contact has the department had with Cerberus? I've heard some soundings from customers that they find it very hard to get in contact with, and a number of other issues have been raised with me, so I would be concerned about how they're going to move forward with the portfolio. Is there any concerns that have been flagged up with the department, and what's the Minister's view on it?
It's something we certainly need to monitor. We, as a department, haven't had any direct contact with Cerberus, but I know the First Minister had a meeting with I think Dan Quayle from Cerberus. So it's a relationship that we don't have established at this point. It will perhaps be different to the relationship that we had with NAMA and the Ulster Bank, but it's something that we certainly need to keep a close eye on in terms of how they're dealing with Northern Ireland customers here.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Apologise for being late this morning. Sorry you didn't hear the first part of your presentation. Just wanted to ask you about organisation of people, OP1. You have an action there to produce a divisional training and developmental plan for 2014-15, and the aim of that is to ensure delivery of relevant training and development activities for SPD staff within a restricted budget. And at the moment that has amber status, is that right? Can I ask you why could you not implement or compile a formal training plan whilst also achieving savings? And what other form of training other than formal courses were considered? And did your efforts have any impact on completion of personal development plans? And what type of feedback you've had from the staff around your work?
Well, there's different types. There's mandatory training, which we're still proceeding with, so folk in the teams, depending on the responsibilities, may need management training in terms of how to manage staff, or where there's various requirements in terms of data protection and the management of information, and all our staff are going in those mandatory courses. That's a given. In the past, we've tended to use these plans for more discretionary, to plan in advance for more discretionary training, such as when maybe staff would be going on technical training courses or on various conferences to maintain their professional knowledge. And normally you would know of those well in advance. There's budgetary implications for those. So what we sought to do is to restrict those, but very conscious of the need to ensure that staff do have access to the professional training. Just kind of, I suppose, by way of background, the vast majority of staff in our division are professional economist staff, so that would tend to be the types of training they go on. So rather than have a formal training plan where we're planning that out for the year, what we have encouraged staff, and I've encouraged staff to do, is to go along to and attend various seminars and events that are being organised throughout the year, such as those by the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin, the NERI Institute, who run various seminars. But because they are, at times they would tend to be announced at relatively short notice, so we haven't done a year start training plan because you couldn't capture those, you don't have sight of those training opportunities. So while we may not have a formal training plan mapping out all the training that staff do, They do go on the mandatory courses as is required, but then we monitor through the year to see what opportunities arise. And as those sorts of seminars that I've highlighted don't come at a cost, so we're able to send staff on those rather than sending them to a conference in England, which would incur an airfare cost and a conference cost and accommodation costs. So we're still ensuring that we're still doing our best endeavours that the professional staff have the opportunity to go to those sorts of events, but it's just not possible to train them given the fact that when they're announced.
Yeah, but the type of seminars you're talking about, you said there's no cost to them, but is that not leaving some aspects of the training to chance? Because if there are seminars, well and good. If they're not, there's a gap there.
Well, as I say, in terms of because our staff are professional staff, they're coming, their training is their professional training, by and large. A lot of, we actually run the SPD. We run a training course on business case evaluation. So we run that in house. So that would be the main aspect of if economist staff need training, that would be perhaps the main vehicle that they're for training, and they go on that. So certainly we're not risking professional development or professional expertise in this. It's really those sorts of going to conferences is about maintaining your just your awareness of latest economic issues, and it's possible to do that without going on conferences over in GB.
Well, it is important that staff are aware and abreast of the latest developments in their particular field, but if you're leaving that to the chance of a seminar happening, is there not a gap still there?
It's not as much chance, I would say. It's really just the degree to which they're pre-announced. There are some regular conferences which we know happen every year. So on that basis, staff would, if you were doing a training plan at the start of the year, say, well, I know this course is going to come up in this conference is going to come up in 9 months' time. And we do it on that basis. When we were sending staff to such conferences and courses. But we do know that these organisations, the likes of the SRI and NERI and others, do have a seminar programme, but it's just sometimes not announced as far enough in advance. So we're not waiting, hoping that some of these opportunities will arise. We know that there is a programme of events which we will be able to tap into.
Can I just add to that, Tony, slightly? Yeah. Just to say that it is also captured at the PPA, PDP level in terms of online training. While it's maybe not captured formally right through the training plan process, it is captured between line managers and staff to ensure that this is followed at the PPA, PDP level.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Judith?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to touch a wee bit on some of the sick pay issue, and obviously the SPD is responsible for development and implementation of pay policy, but would your remit go as far as talking about any of the sick pay issue? No,
that's a totally separate issue. In terms of our pay policy, it's really just about controlling and monitoring pay awards.
Yeah. Okay, but just within SPD itself, you've got a green there that you are keeping in line with departmental sick absence targets. Is there a role to try and take that one step further? So say your branch does not have an issue with it and it is within the 9 days or whatever the target is, should we be pushing ourselves, should individual branches be pushing themselves a bit further and saying, actually, no, we should be putting a reduction target in each year rather than just saying keeping within, because there'll be some branches that struggle further. And obviously, if they are sitting at 14 days and bring it down to 10, they have done something about it. If you're sitting at 9 and you still sit at 9, you haven't really actually done anything to reduce. 9 days is still too many days sick in the public sector in comparison to other areas. So is that something that you could consider doing?
Well, it's an issue corporately for the whole department and arguably for the wider civil service. There are guidelines in place, there are procedures to ensure that when you do have sick absences, that staff are supported and are managed back to work as soon as is possible, and we adhere to all the processes that are set centrally by corporate services.
Challenge yourselves a wee bit more.
Oh no, certainly. And when we're talking here about all the departmental targets are met, that's not to say that we're saying, well, if it's an average of 9 days, I don't have the figures in front of me. It's not to say that we're content if it's X number of days. That's to say that we're managing, we're applying the processes that are set in place by the department. So certainly what I want to see is as low a sick level as is possible, and we're fully applying all the processes and procedures in there to ensure that staff are supported when there are sick absences, but that they are minimised as much as possible, and we have people in work when they should be in work.
Okay, Michaela.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just in relation to where the plan could be improved to align with good practice performance reporting, I just see for example, on B2 and C2 where it is on target for 2015, and how there could be clear linkage to higher level departments under the programme for government targets. Can this be better achieved? Are you confident that it all has been done, or is there room for improvement in that area?
In terms of B2, in terms of providing professional advice and support? Yes, no, certainly this all, our divisional plan, this all cascades down. We have we've got the programme for government, we have, the department's corporate plan, our directorate, which is strategic planning, our strategic policy and reform directorate, and then we sit below that. So, this all cascades down from the programme for government. There are some of a lot of things are at a lower level in terms of in B2, that's around providing advice to our customers and which is essentially the Minister and senior officials on the broad range of policy issues. So, we're doing all we can to meet those deadlines, and we are exceeding those. In terms of the programme for government, there are a number of targets that directly relate to the programme for government. We've targets around corporation tax at B1. What you won't see here in this year's plan would have been, we also had a target which directly fed into the programme for government on the devolution of our passenger duty and long haul flights. That's not in this year's plan because we secured the devolution of that measure. So yes, no, this all links in with the PFG and the targets and flows from that.
Can some of the targets be strengthened and tightened to make them more specific and challenging and measurable in terms of outcomes?
Well, we're always seeking to do that, and then when you're referring to B2, that's around meeting deadlines to ensure that we're providing the advice when Minister or other senior officials need that. We have a quite a high target at the moment of 95% of the advice on time without clarification being needed, and we're exceeding that. But yes, certainly as a general comment, when we're moving forward to the next business plan, we are constantly looking to see how we can improve the service we deliver, both in the quality of it and the timeliness of it. So it's certainly something I'll be seeking to do as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much again.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, members, moving on to the research briefing. Can I refer you to the Assembly research on legal complaints and regulations follow-up issues at pages 79 through to 103 of your packs, and also the research on complaints and disciplinary processes at pages 104 through to 119. Okay, can I welcome Fiona O'Connell to the meeting? You're very welcome, Fiona. Fiona, do you want to just present the paper
Yes,
to the members first, and then we'll go to Q&A.
That's grand. Thank you, Chair. I've actually got two papers to present today. One which deals with follow-up issues from a previous paper back in June, and the other on internal complaints and disciplinary processes within the legal professions. If you're content, Chair, I'll outline the key points from the follow-up issues paper first, and then I'll turn to the paper on internal complaints then before Q&A, if that's okay. So in June this year, I presented a paper which compared arrangements for legal complaints and regulation in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. And the paper found that systems in England and Wales, Scotland, and as proposed in the Republic of Ireland, provide for independent bodies for the handling of complaints. On the basis of the presentation, the committee had questions in 4 areas. I wasn't able to provide an answer at that time, but said I would seek the information where possible. So the first issue was what monitoring is undertaken to ensure transparency and fairness in mediation or complaint resolution to ensure that both participants are satisfied in the process. And this research found that bodies in England and Wales, Scotland and the Republic undertook monitoring either via customer satisfaction surveys conducted by telephone or online or through customer feedback forms. The second issue raised by committee members was whether there's a consistency of approach and streamlining of complaints procedures. In England and Wales, there's guidance set by the Legal Services Board to approved regulators, which be the Law Society or the Bar Council, which sets out principles in relation to first-tier complaints. In Scotland, the Law Society sets basic principles regarding complaints procedures, and the Faculty of Advocates, which is divided into stables, not similar to a chambers system, have their own internal processes. The Law Society of Ireland has published practice notes, which includes a statement which may be useful for firms who wish to have their own complaints procedure. The third issue that the committee were interested in was whether an award of compensation could prejudice further legal action, for example, in cases of negligence or malfeasance where there's been a large amount of money possibly lost. In England and Wales, the Ombudsman can't actually deal with the complaint if legal action has been initiated on the same issue. However, if a person pursues a complaint to the legal Ombudsman first and they don't agree with the final decision, they're free to pursue a negligence route. In Scotland, the Scottish Legal Complaints Commission will take into account compensation awarded by another body, and that's to avoid duplication so that there isn't compensation awarded on the same issue by 2 different bodies. And in the Republic, there's legislation in respect of solicitors which provides that any award of compensation is without prejudice to the complainant's legal rights. And we've also found that the Barristers' Professional Conduct Tribunal will avoid cutting across the jurisdiction of the court until a result's known. The fourth issue was the number and nature of complaints upheld, and I'm not going to go into depth on this issue because there's a lot of data actually within the paper and it's all there for you, but I'll just give some headline stuff. In England and Wales, the Legal Ombudsman resolved 7,630 complaints about lawyers. In 2012 to 13, 533 cases were closed, 722 were dealt with by formal resolution, and 765 were dealt with by an Ombudsman decision. The largest number of cases dealt with informally related to residential conveyancing, followed by family law. And the largest number of dealt with by an Ombudsman decision was in family law cases, followed by residential conveyancing, so it was switched the other way around. And the biggest cause of complaints was a result of failure to advise, followed by failure to follow instructions and delay. In Scotland, in 2012, the Scottish Legal Complaints Commission received 1,123 complaints. In terms of complaints upheld, the largest number related to, and also partially upheld, because there's figures for both upheld and partially upheld, the largest number related to residential conveyancing. The biggest cause of complaints upheld was failure to communicate, followed by failure to follow instructions. And there's figures in Annexes D and D of this paper if you want further details, and it gives a bigger breakdown. In the Republic of Ireland, it's only been possible to get information on the nature of complaints received rather than those upheld, but figures from the Complaints and Clients Relations Committee of the Law Society in 2012 to 13 suggested that the largest area of complaints related to allegations of misconduct in the form of non-compliance with undertakings, and there were 1,288 complaints on this issue. And just for information, undertakings are a statement, it's either orally or in writing, that a solicitor will undertake to do something. For example, we will undertake to provide or to return documents by a specified date, so just by way of explanation. Information from the Barristers Conduct Tribunal suggests that 50 complaints were investigated by the tribunal. 20 of these related to opposition counsel, and they suggest that that might be not actually understanding the role of the opposition counsel. And 15 alleged that the counsel was not following instructions, 11 alleged undue pressure, and there was 1 allegation of dishonesty. So I'm actually going to move on to the second part, complaints and disciplinary procedures, and it's actually very difficult to present process. It's all there in the paper, so I'm just going to highlight 2 key points. I think the first key point really is that there are different features in the systems. In England and Wales, complaints about the conduct of barristers are dealt by the Bar Standards Board, and it's overseen by the Legal Services Board. It has a remit for setting standards of conduct for barristers, and is made up of 15 people. And it's a combination of lay people and barristers, and it has a lay majority. And if it decides that a complaint warrants disciplinary action, it will refer to an independent disciplinary tribunal. Now, a report has found that it actually criticised aspects of the British Bar Standards Board's work, and it had said that it failed to reach satisfactory standards in every area in which it operated. That was a report that was published in 2013. The Solicitors Regulation Authority regulates the professional conduct of solicitors in England and Wales, and it's an independent regulatory body created by the Law Society, and complaints may be made by a member of the public or another solicitor. So you have the SRA that deals with solicitors and the Bar Standards Board that deals with barristers. In Scotland, the Scottish Legal Complaints Commission acts as a gateway for all complaints, either service or conduct complaints. Now, they can't investigate a conduct complaint, but it goes through the SLCC first. It refers, if it's determined that it is a conduct complaint, it will refer to either the Law Society of Scotland or the Faculty of Advocates, which is a comparable body to the Bar Council, and they have their own processes for handling complaints, and I've set these out in the paper for you. But the SLCC can investigate the handling of a conduct complaint, and they can produce a report containing recommendations on how a conduct complaint was dealt with. So they have an audit role, and they can investigate that, and they can actually make recommendations that a complaint's reinvestigated or reconsidered, or further information is given. In the Republic of Ireland, formal intervention in relation to complaints of misconduct brought by a fellow professional or dealt with by the Complaints and Clients Relations Committee in respect of solicitors, and it's comprised of both solicitors and lay people, or the Bar Council Professional Practices Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Bar in respect of barristers, and it's comprised of a chairman and other members of the Bar Council. And they may actually refer a complaint to the Barristers Professional Conduct Committee, that's independent from the Bar. Now, the Legal Services Regulation Bill that's currently going through the Oireachtas doesn't actually address the issue of internal complaints processes, but I suspect that the professional bodies would still have a role in that, in handling internal complaints. So that's the first point, that each of the systems have different features. The second key point is that complaints between professionals actually appear to be quite small or rare. For example, the Bar Standards Board reported that there were 5% of around 400 complaints came from other barristers in 2013-14. And in relation to Scotland, I've been told by a representative of the Faculty of Advocates that it's very rare for an advocate to complain about another advocate, that complaints tend to come from other sources or other persons. So given potentially that there might be a small number of complaints, it might be disproportionate to consider a commission or a body to deal with that, but you might want to consider whether there's scope for considering aspects of the Scottish Legal Complaints model to be incorporated into the draft bill. For example, is there a role for the proposed Oversight Commissioner to maybe have an auditing role in relation to these types of complaints, and that might be something worth considering, whether there's scope for that. So I'm happy to finish there, and if anybody's any questions.
Okay, members, any questions about the research? All happy enough?
It's good stuff.
Good stuff, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thanks
very much, Cesar.
Good.
Got off easily this time. Thank you.
Members, can I just propose that we forward the research papers to the department for a response, including, for example, what I'd find interesting was the potential for the forthcoming bill to apply some aspects of the model in Scotland for handling both conduct and service complaints. Members agreeable?
Very good.
Okay, correspondence.
Okay, Chair. Most of the correspondence is for noting, Chair. Just to draw members' attention to maybe one or two items. There's various pieces of correspondence in from other committees in relation to sickness absence in other departments, justice and employment and learning in particular. That will be incorporated into the committee's draft report for the next draft coming back to the committee again, Chair. Just one piece of correspondence, it's a page 202 of the pack. Historic Royal Palaces is writing to seek a briefing to brief the committee on its plans for Hillsborough Castle, which is now passed from NIO over to Historic Royal Palaces. It's a charity which oversees a number of stately buildings. So we understand that they've written to a number of committees, and probably in terms of the relevance to the DFP remit, it may not be just as directly relevant as some of the other committees. So just really to seek members' views to the wish to kind of seek a written update and to be kept informed of progress in this area rather than direct briefings, or do they wish to schedule a briefing? Or
members content with the written briefing initially?
Yeah.
Okay, Chair, that's all the correspondence requiring decisions.
Okay, members, committee work programme draft on pages 205 to 209 of your packs. Members content with that as presented?
Yep.
Just under any other business, it's normal practice for committees to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair during periods of recess to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information of any non-routine contentious FOI requests received. The committee will be advised of any such requests, the views expressed by the Chair, Deputy Chair and the response issued by the FOI unit at the first available meeting following the recess period. Members agreeable to that?
Agreed.
Any other business? Next meeting will be Wednesday the 5th of November at 10 a.m.
Thank you.